So, Dad gave me this little loco in around 1983 or 4, and it hides something of a secret. We always knew it as a E-tank because it resembled an E2-ish tank, but it's more about what powers her. Let's take a look. Back in the early 80s, Dad passed me a model equipped with a Stewart Reidpath motor. This model is incredibly heavy for an 060 tank, weighing in at 560 grams. I used her to pull my track cleaning coach, as honestly nothing can stop this engine. Only recently have I become aware of the historical significance of the locomotive and mechanism. My moment of illumination came when I found the original sales invoice and manual from where Dad purchased it back in 1949, some 75 years ago, and Dad was just 16 then. The images you are looking at are of that sales invoice and instruction sheet that came with the model. So rare and remarkable was it back then that it commanded such an intricate sale and instruction set. I'll read a few parts to you, but for those that would like to absorb the detail, please pause the video and check it out. Looking at the main sheet, we can see that the serial number is shown as 994, but has text of RRRD prior to it. It was dispatched on the 11th of March 1949 to Messrs Hambling's, Cecil Court, Charing Cross Road, WC2. That would be Hambling's, the big model shop. This has been overstamped with Wild Brothers, 58 to 60 Fratton Road, Portsmouth. I can't find any details on them. Wild Brothers is where Dad obtained it on the 1st of October 1949. Quite how it made its way from the famous Hamblings to Fratton is one of those mysteries of time, I guess. Looking at the next sections, it's clear that we are dealing with something very special indeed, with detailed notes offered on the construction and function of the motor and how to care for it. Note how they say to use a 12-volt car battery that you trickle charge yourself, or indeed maybe 2 of the 6-volt radio batteries that could be recharged for you at the radio shop. Not everybody was connected to the electricity when these motors began to come on stream. How did they control them? Well, often they would use a resistance, and that resistance would come from a 1-bar electric fire. You know, the type with a coil in it, and a wiper would be made to move up and down the bar with the connection at one end between that and the track. Thus a resistance could be made and the loco could be controlled to some degree. I'm not entirely sure how brilliantly that would have worked, but never mind. I could go on and on about this, but I'm sure some of my viewers are wishing I'd cut to the main event, and so here it is. The body is released by undoing the screws through each coupling. Now, using photos, we will strip down and clean this amazing bit of model railway history. Here you can see the phosphor bronze motor brushes, commutator and drive gears. Looking at the other side, we have the drive from the armature. Let's take the bearing arm off. Back to the brush side, let's remove the bearing arm now for a better look at the commutator. The motor block screws into the chassis. Removing these screws lets us look at the underside and the all-important magnets. You can see the magnet keeper plate here, which is free to remove and so allow us to extract the armature for inspection and cleaning. It was certainly very grubby. Now you see the chassis with armature removed. Left and right are the silver magnets, which are still super powerful. Now a look at the chassis of the loco. Time to clean and add oil to those bearings. Reassembly was simple enough. What a solid design. The motor brush arms have shortened over time as they have worn, resulting in the arm being pushed further in than it is intended. This means that tape is needed to ensure they lay flat and the brushes are in proper contact with the commutator. I fitted a suppressor between the pickups here, as the chassis is in fact dead. Just attach some wires to the bottom so I can show you the mechanism working in close up. and how critical those brushes are for positioning. There we go. Quite basic, but rather beautiful as well. Let's go down and see her running and discuss the further significant history of this locomotive and mechanism. In the early 1920s, three significant men in the shape of modellers from the newly formed Wimbledon Model Railway Club, Stewart Reidpath, A.R. Walkley and Michael Longridge. Sometime in 1923 they began experimenting with models roughly half the size of Gauge O, which had so far been the standard for model trains. 1925, over the next few years, a number of specialist firms emerged to serve the new gauges. The first, Marshall Stewart, later Stewart Reidpath Limited, were HO specialists. Their cast metal 060 tank body was almost the only widely available loco. By the mid-30s, Stewart Reidpath were also advertising 00 gauge material, a first sign that British HO was fading. W&H Models remained London's largest model shop until their demise in 1994, and they began advertising 00 gauge components in 1928. Bonds of Euston Road were advertising a hand-built 062 tank in 00 gauge from April 1929, whilst another London firm, Hamblings, proclaimed themselves the home of 00 gauge and stocked nothing else. The late 40s saw a great changeover from 6-volt 3-rail electrification to 12-volt 2-rail. Marshall Stewart, circa 1920, was father and son Archibald Marshall Reidpath, the father, and Archibald Stewart Reidpath, the son. Their first catalogue being exclusively O-gauge models, although by 1932 they became Stewart Reidpath Limited, focusing on HO and later 00 gauge. Stewart Reidpath were using the names Stewart Reidpath Limited, SR Limited and ESSA. Now if you remember on the manual that we were seeing, it was noted as ESSA. The Reverend Audrey, author of the famous Thomas the Tank Engine book, said, "I bought Thomas in 1948. Thomas was one of Stewart Reidpath's standard models with a heavy cast white metal body and was fitted with his ESSA chassis and motor. Now we know where my model came from. In fact, I have a version of the original Thomas the Tank Engine. How amazingly cool is that?" Sure, she does not run with the smoothness of modern models, but then I doubt any of the super detailed fall-aparts will be around in 75 years' time. Remarkably too, the locomotive draws the stated 250 milliamps, as in the manual, all this time later. What an incredible story. Thanks for coming along with me in it.